I spent $52,000 on concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every single penny, every drop of sweat, and every sleepless night I spent staring at the ceiling, picturing that 12-foot monument to pure, unadulterated spite. She thought because she drove a shiny white BMW X5 and ran the homeowners association of the glorified subdivision next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas, the deed is king, and a piece of paper signed in 1940 by my great-grandfather carries a hell of a lot more weight than a lease on a German SUV. My name is Hank McCoy, and my family has owned the Broken Spur Ranch for 4 generations. It's not the biggest spread in the county, not by a long shot, but these 50 acres are ours. They're soaked in the blood, sweat, and tears of McCoys who came before me. The main gravel road that cuts through the property, the one that leads from the county blacktop back to the old homestead and the barns, was carved out by my great-granddad's own 2 hands and a mule-drawn grader. It's as much a part of this ranch as the live oaks that shade the creek bed or the Angus cattle that graze the pastures. For 80 years, that road served one purpose: to get McCoys and their business from point A to point B on McCoy land. Then came Lakeside Estates. It started with the distant sound of bulldozers, a low grumble on the horizon that slowly grew into a roar. A developer had bought the fallow 200 acres bordering my eastern fence line, a parcel that had been nothing but scrub brush and coyotes for as long as I could remember. Soon, the mesquite was cleared, the land was scraped flat, and cookie-cutter houses started popping up like mushrooms after a spring rain. They were big, ostentatious things, all beige stucco and faux Tuscan flourishes, crammed together on tiny lots with barely enough room for a patch of unnaturally green grass. My wife, Sarah, a high school history teacher with a healthy dose of cynicism, called it instant neighborhood. With the houses came the people, city folks mostly, chasing a fantasy of country living without any of the dirt, noise, or reality that comes with it. And with the people came the homeowners association, the self-appointed monarchy of the Beige Kingdom. Its queen, I soon learned, was a woman named Cynthia Halloway. I first saw her not as a person, but as a flash of white and a cloud of dust. I was out checking the fence along the new development, making sure none of the construction crews had done any damage. My prize Angus herd, including a few pregnant heifers that were the future of my operation, were grazing peacefully in the east pasture. That's when her white BMW came tearing down my gravel road from the county blacktop. She must have been doing 50, kicking up rocks in a plume of dust that settled over my cattle like a dirty shroud. I just stood there, hands on my hips, and watched her disappear toward the back of my property, where my road happened to run parallel to the rear entrance of her new subdivision. I figured it was a one-time mistake, a wrong turn maybe. I'm a patient man. I've had to be, working with stubborn 2,000-pound bulls my whole life. I tipped my hat to the dust cloud and went back to checking my fence. But the next day, it happened again. This time, I was closer to the road, walking back to the barn. The same white BMW, the same reckless speed. I raised a hand, a friendly gesture to slow down, but the driver just laid on the horn, a shrill European sound that didn't belong out here, and sped past. That evening, another car, a silver Lexus this time, followed the same path, then a Range Rover. It was becoming a highway. The following Saturday, I decided it was time for a polite conversation. I parked my old Ford F-250 sideways across the road, right at the entrance from the blacktop, and sat on the tailgate with a thermos of coffee. It didn't take long. The white BMW pulled up, and a woman with sharp blonde hair and a face that looked like it was permanently smelling something bad rolled down her window. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that sets your teeth on edge. "You're blocking the road?" "Evening, ma'am," I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Hank McCoy. This here is my ranch." She gave me a tight, condescending smile. "Cynthia Halloway. I'm the president of the Lakeside Estates HOA, and this is the community access road. Now, if you could please move your truck." She said the word truck like it was a piece of manure she'd stepped in. I stood up, hooked my thumbs in my belt loops. "Ma'am, With all due respect, this ain't a community access road. This is the private driveway for the Broken Spur Ranch. Has been since 1940. The county road is a half-mile that way. I pointed with my chin. Her smile vanished. That's ridiculous. Our developer assured us this was a dedicated easement. It's on our community plat as a scenic drive. It's a selling point. Well, your developer either lied or he's an idiot, I said, keeping my voice even. This road starts on my land, crosses my land, and ends on my land. There's no easement. Never has been. I'd appreciate it if you and your neighbors would stick to the public roads from now on. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. I could see the gears turning in her head, calculating. This wasn't a neighborly dispute to her. It was a business problem. We'll see about that, she snapped, and threw her car into reverse, tires spitting gravel as she backed out onto the blacktop. I watched her go, finished my coffee, and moved my truck. I thought, foolishly, that a clear, polite warning would be enough. I underestimated the potent combination of entitlement and desperation. The traffic didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. It was like she'd taken my warning as a challenge. So I moved to the next logical step. I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest duty chain I could find and a hardened steel padlock. I sank 2 thick cedar posts on either side of my road, right where it met the county line, and strung the chain across. I hung a brand new, professionally printed sign on it. Private property, Broken Spur Ranch, no trespassing. It was clear, simple, and legally unambiguous. That chain lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, I found it lying in the dirt, cut clean through with a pair of bolt cutters. The padlock was gone, and there were fresh tire tracks, the distinctive tread of her BMW leading down my road. I just stood there looking at the severed links of the chain. The politeness was gone from my veins, replaced by a cold, slow-burning anger. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a declaration of war. I replaced the chain, this time with a thicker, case-hardened logging chain that would laugh at a pair of bolt cutters. I also mounted a game camera to a nearby oak tree, aimed directly at the gate. My wife Sarah saw the look on my face when I came in that evening. She put a hand on my arm. "You're planning something," she said. It wasn't a question. Good. She'd seen the tire tracks, heard the honking. She was a quiet woman, but she had a spine of steel, and she loved our animals as much as I did. The real crisis, the moment that turned this from a property dispute into a blood feud, happened 3 days later. I was in the barn mending a leather halter when I heard it. A sustained, frantic honking, followed by the terrified bellowing of cattle. My blood ran cold. I dropped the halter and sprinted outside. There she was, Cynthia Halloway. She'd somehow gotten through the new chain. I'd later see on the camera that she and some guy had used a portable angle grinder, sparks flying in the pre-dawn light, and was now driving her BMW through my herd of pregnant Angus heifers. They were panicked, scattering in every direction, their heavy bodies clumsy with pregnancy. She wasn't trying to edge through them. She was laying on the horn, revving her engine, actively trying to stampede them out of her way. I've never moved so fast in my life. I vaulted the nearest fence and ran, screaming at her, my voice raw with a fury I hadn't felt in years. "Get out of here! Get the hell off my land!" She saw me coming, and instead of stopping, she gunned it. One of my best heifers, a beautiful animal named Daisy that was due in a few weeks and was worth a solid 15 grand, stumbled in her panic. She went down hard, her leg twisting under her at a sickening angle. Cynthia's BMW swerved around her without even slowing down and disappeared down the road. I ran to Daisy's side. She was trying to get up, her eyes wide with pain and fear. Her right foreleg was clearly broken. Worse, I could see the telltale signs of premature labor, brought on by the stress and the fall. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. This wasn't about a road anymore. This was about cruelty. This was about a complete and utter disregard for my life, my livelihood, and the innocent animals I was responsible for. I managed to get the vet out. He did what he could. He set Daisy's leg, a complicated and expensive procedure for an animal that large. He gave her drugs to try and stop the labor, but it was a long shot. He looked at me, his face grim. She might lose the calf, Hank. And even if she doesn't, her breeding days are probably over. That was a champion bloodline. I spent the rest of the day in a cold rage, sitting with Daisy, trying to comfort her. When Sarah got home from school, she found me there. She took one look at the situation, at Daisy's cast, at the darkness on my face, and her own expression hardened. She didn't need to say a word. We were in this together. That night, after the vet had left, and Daisy was as stable as she could be, I went back to the entrance of my road. I stood where the chain had been cut twice. I looked down that gravel path, the path my great-grandfather had built, now stained with arrogance and violence, and I made a vow this would not happen again. There would be no more warnings, no more chains. She wanted a war over this piece of dirt. She was going to get one. I was done being the polite rancher. I was going to become the unmovable object she would break herself against. The paper war was about to begin, but I already knew how it would end, with a barrier she could never cross and a ruin she had built for herself. The day after Daisy's injury was the start of the official hostilities. Cynthia, realizing she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, decided her best defense was a preemptive, overwhelming offense. She went from being a nuisance to a one-woman bureaucratic terrorist. Her first volley came in the form of a crisp, official-looking SUV from the Environmental Protection Agency rolling up to my violated gate. Two people in stiff new windbreakers got out, looking deeply uncomfortable to be on a dirt road. A man and a woman, both looking like they'd just graduated college. They had a clipboard and an air of nervous authority. "Mr. Hank McCoy," the young man asked. "That's me," I said, leaning against the fender of my Ford. I'd been expecting something, so I wasn't surprised. "We've received an anonymous complaint," the woman began, avoiding eye contact, "regarding potential violations of the Clean Water Act. The complaint alleges that runoff from your cattle operation is contaminating the watershed that feeds into the Lakeside Estates reservoir." I almost laughed. My ranch sat on a gentle slope that drained away from the development, a fact any fool with a topographical map could see. My stock tanks and streams were managed with a system of swales and buffer zones my granddad had designed with the county extension agent back in the 60s. I was probably the most environmentally compliant rancher in 3 counties. A complaint, you say? From someone who just happens to live in the new subdivision? I asked, my voice flat. The young man cleared his throat. The complainant wished to remain anonymous. We're just required to follow up. We'll need to take a look at your waste management systems and take some water samples from the creek. Be my guest, I said with a wave of my hand. I'll show you around myself. Get your boots dirty. For the next 2 hours, I gave them the grand tour. I showed them my rotational grazing charts that prevent overgrazing and erosion. I showed them the vegetated buffer strips along Willow Creek, wider and healthier than required by any regulation. I showed them my manure composting system, which turns waste into black gold for my hayfields. They took their samples, their clipboards slowly filling with notes. By the end, their faces had changed from suspicion to something like admiration. "Mr. McCoy," the woman said, finally looking me in the eye, "your operation is exemplary. This is one of the cleanest, best managed small ranches I've ever seen." "Glad to hear it," I said. "You tell whoever sent you that my cows are cleaner than their conscience." They left, and I knew I'd never hear from the EPA again. But it was a hassle. It cost me a morning of work and filled me with a simmering resentment. This was her game. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. A week later, the county health inspector showed up. Another anonymous complaint, this time about flies, odor, and the potential for zoonotic diseases. It was the same song. Second verse. I walked him through the same tour. He was a local guy, a fellow named Gene, who I'd known for 20 years. He took one look around, sniffed the air, and shook his head. "Hank, this is a waste of my time and yours," he said, tucking his notepad into his shirt pocket. "Place smells like a ranch, which is what it is. It's cleaner than half the restaurants I have to inspect. I'll file the report. Don't you worry about it. He looked over toward the beige houses glinting in the sun. Some people moved to the country and expect it to be a damned petting zoo. The false reports were annoying, a deliberate campaign of harassment, but the next attack was far more serious. A county sheriff's deputy, looking apologetic, served me with a lawsuit. I stood on my porch, the screen door squeaking behind me, and took the packet of papers. Yeah, the plaintiff was the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. The defendant was me. The charge? I was illegally obstructing a public thoroughfare and denying residents their deeded access. It demanded I remove all barriers immediately and pay the HOA for damages and legal fees. It was a declaration of total war, signed and notarized by Cynthia Halloway, president. Sarah read over the legal jargon that night, her brow furrowed. They're claiming a prescriptive easement, she said, her teacher's mind dissecting the language. They're arguing that because people have been using the road, it's become a public right-of-way. People have been using it for 2 months, I spat, and only because she's been leading them down it like the Pied Piper. Before that, it was 80 years of nothing but McCoys. That's what we have to prove, Hank, she said, her voice steady. We need to show the chain of title. We need the original survey. So began my descent into the catacombs of the county clerk's office. It's a dusty, quiet place, in the basement of the old courthouse, smelling of aging paper and weak coffee. For 3 straight days, I sat at a long wooden table, poring over massive, leather-bound plat books. The clerk, a woman named Mary Beth, whose mother had gone to school with my mother, was a godsend. She helped me navigate the labyrinthine indexing system, pulling records from the 1940s, then cross-referencing them with deeds from the 1920s, when my great-granddad first bought the parcels that would become the ranch. I traced the lineage of my 50 acres, deed by deed. And there it was, on a fragile, hand-drawn survey map from 1947, attached to the finalized deed. The map showed my property lines in stark, unambiguous ink. It showed the county blacktop, and it showed my road labeled clearly, Private Drive, McCoy Tract, for exclusive use of landowner. There was no mention of an easement, no hint of public access. It was a private road then, and nothing had ever been filed to change that. I found the deed for the adjacent property, the one the developer had bought. I traced its history, too. No easement was ever granted from my family's land. The developer, and by extension Cynthia, had absolutely zero legal claim to my road. They had built their entire sales pitch on a foundation of pure, unadulterated bullshit. I paid for certified copies of everything: the 1947 survey, the original deed, the chain of title. Holding those papers felt like holding a shield. It was the truth, written in ink and sanctified by law. My lawyer, a sharp old country attorney named Ben Carter, looked them over and grinned. "Well, Hank," he said, leaning back in his creaky office chair, "their lawsuit is dead on arrival. We'll file a motion to dismiss with this as evidence. They'll be laughed out of court." But just as I was feeling the first flicker of victory, the war escalated onto a new front. This is where the final piece of the puzzle, the key to not just defending myself, but destroying her, fell right into my lap. It came from the most unlikely source, Eddie the mailman. Eddie was a fixture in our part of the county. He'd been delivering mail on this route for 30 years, first to the scattered ranches and now to the sprawling new subdivision. He was a quiet, observant man who saw and heard everything. One afternoon, he pulled his little white truck up to my mailbox as I was fixing the fence nearby. He leaned out the window. "Mr. McCoy," he said, his voice low, "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but what that Halloway woman is doing ain't right." I stopped what I was doing and walked over. "What's that, Eddie?" "I deliver the mail to her real estate office in the clubhouse over there," he said, nodding toward Lakeside Estates. "I see the flyers she leaves out. I hear her on the phone with customers." He hesitated, then pushed a glossy brochure through the window at me. "She's promising them access," he whispered. She's not just saying it's a shortcut. She's selling your road as a private community amenity. Exclusive access to the historic Willow Creek Trail, she calls it. Says it's perfect for hiking, jogging, and scenic drives. It's in all her sales contracts. I took the brochure. There, in full color, was a picture of my creek, my live oaks, and my gravel road. The headline read, Lakeside Estates, where luxury living meets rustic charm. The text below explicitly listed the private ranch road as a key feature, a members-only benefit. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This wasn't even just a frivolous lawsuit. This was fraud. She was selling something she didn't own, something she knew she didn't own, to dozens of unsuspecting families. She was basing her commission checks, her career, and the very legality of her sales contracts on a lie. That's when I knew I had her. The lawsuit was a defensive victory. This was a weapon. This was the ammunition I needed to not just end the fight, but to win it in a way she would never recover from. Before I could even deploy this new weapon, she made her most audacious move yet. She took her case to the court of public opinion. A local news channel ran a segment on the evening news. It opened with a shot of the new, pristine entrance to Lakeside Estates, then cut to a tight shot of my heavy chain and no trespassing sign. Cynthia Halloway stood there looking concerned and reasonable, a wolf in sheep's clothing. We're just a new community trying to coexist peacefully, she said to the reporter, her voice full of synthetic sorrow. We were promised this access, a beautiful country lane for our families to enjoy, but this belligerent local landowner is holding us hostage, blocking a road that has been used for years. The reporter then cut to a pre-recorded interview with me. They'd caught me coming out of the feed store looking tired and dirty. I'd tried to explain that it was private property, but they edited my comments down to a few grumpy-sounding clips. It's my land, my voice grumbled on the television, making me sound like a backwoods tyrant. The segment ended with a shot of children on bicycles looking sadly at my chained-off road, with Cynthia putting a comforting hand on a little girl's shoulder. I was portrayed as the villain, the stubborn old redneck standing in the way of progress and happy families. My phone started ringing. A few were from friends telling me not to worry about the slanted report, but others were from strangers, people in town who'd seen the news and bought her story. They called me selfish, a bully. Sarah turned off the TV, her lips a thin, angry line. They twisted everything, she said. I know, I replied, but my voice was calm. The smear campaign didn't matter anymore. The lawsuit didn't matter. The false reports didn't matter. They were all just pieces of a bigger picture, a portrait of her own self-destruction that she was painting with furious strokes. I had the deed. I had the survey. And now, thanks to Eddie the mailman, I had the proof of her fraud. I looked out the window at the darkening pasture. The anger I'd been feeling for weeks had cooled and solidified into something much harder and more dangerous. Purpose. She had escalated this from my fence line to the EPA to the courthouse to the 6 o'clock news. Fine. I would provide the final escalation. An escalation made not of paper or words, but of steel and concrete. This was the moment I decided to build the wall. It wasn't just about blocking the road anymore. It was about creating a permanent, physical, and legally untouchable monument to her failure. It was about building a trap that she, in her arrogance, would drive herself right into. I had all the evidence I needed to ruin her in a courtroom, but I realized that wasn't enough. I wanted her to see her defeat. I wanted her to ram her entitled, fraudulent ambitions headfirst into an immovable object of my creation. And I was willing to spend a good chunk of my savings to make it happen. I had a feeling the satisfaction would be priceless. If you've ever been pushed to the brink by someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them, you know exactly the feeling I'm talking about. You know that point where turning the other cheek is no longer an option and going nuclear becomes the only rational response. If you get that, do me a favor and hit that like button. Now, let me tell you how I built my masterpiece. The decision to build the wall wasn't made in anger. It was made with the cold, clear-eyed logic of a man who'd been pushed too far. It was a strategic decision, a capital investment in my own peace of mind. The first call I made wasn't to a lawyer, but to a man known simply as Big Mike. Big Mike was a contractor, but that's like calling a hurricane, a little bit of wind. He was a force of nature, a huge man with a booming laugh, a wad of tobacco permanently tucked in his cheek, and hands the size of dinner plates. He specialized in agricultural and industrial construction, barns, silos, concrete stock tanks, things that needed to last 100 years and withstand anything a 2-ton bull or a Texas tornado could throw at them. He also had a deep-seated, philosophical hatred of entitled people and bureaucratic nonsense. He was the perfect man for the job. I met him at the site where my violated gate stood like a sad monument to my earlier, more naive attempts at security. I laid it all out for him. The trespassing, the injured heifer, the lawsuit, the fraud. I showed him the brochure Cynthia was using. Big Mike spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed with a sizzle on the dusty ground. "Son of a bitch," he rumbled, his voice like gravel pouring into a barrel. "Selling your land right out from under you. That takes a special kind of brass." "I don't just want to block the road, Mike," I said, looking him square in the eye. "I want to make a statement. I want something so permanent, so absolute, that a tank would have a hard time getting through it. I want to salt the earth." A slow grin spread across his face. "I like your style, Hank. You want a fence, or you want a fortress?" "I want a fortress," I confirmed. We spent the next hour walking the property line, designing my masterpiece of spite. It wouldn't just be a wall across the road. It would be a complete sealing of the border. We planned a 150-foot-long, 12-foot-high barrier. It would be made of steel-reinforced, high PSI concrete, the kind they use for highway overpasses. The wall itself would be a foot thick, with footings sunk 6 feet into the ground. Where the road was, we'd install a new gate, but this wouldn't be some chain-link affair. It would be a custom-built, solid steel sliding gate set into a heavy-duty steel frame that was anchored directly into the concrete wall on either side. The whole thing would be automated, opened only by a remote I kept in my truck. "Even a tank ain't getting through this," Big Mike said with profound satisfaction, sketching the design on a notepad. "You're talking serious money, though. Rebar, forms, 50-plus yards of concrete, heavy equipment, custom fabrication for that gate. You're looking at north of 50 grand. "I've got it," I said without hesitation. It was the money I'd been saving for a new bull, my cattle fund. But protecting the herd I had was more important than expanding it. "Paid in cash." Mike's grin widened. "Cash is king. Now, let's talk permits." This was the part I'd been worried about. I figured Cynthia and her HOA would try to stop the construction with legal challenges and injunctions. But Big Mike was smarter than that. "We're not building a fence," he explained, spitting again for emphasis. "A fence might fall under residential zoning or HOA oversight, even on your own land, if they want to get screwy with the lawyers. No, we're going to the county and filing for a permit to construct an agricultural security barrier." "A what?" "It's a specific classification. It's for protecting high-value livestock operations from theft, vandalism, and biological contamination. With your prize Angus herd and the fact that you can document the trespassing and harassment, they'll approve it, no questions asked. It's for agricultural use on agriculturally zoned land. An HOA has zero jurisdiction. The county treats it like building a barn. It's your land, your business. Legally, it's untouchable." It was brilliant. He was using the system, the very same bureaucratic machinery she tried to use against me, to build my defense. The next day, we went to the county planning office. With my deed, my agricultural tax status, and a copy of the police report I'd filed about the trespassing and Daisy's injury, the permit was approved in 48 hours. The rubber stamp hit the paper with a satisfying thud. Now came the most delicious part of the plan: the timing. I still had Eddie the mailman as my inside source. I asked him to keep an eye out for any big events Cynthia was planning. A few days later, he called me. "Big doings this weekend, Hank. he said. She's having her big summer showcase open house at Lakeside Estates. Realtors coming in from all over the state. She's got a caterer, a string quartet, the whole 9 yards. She's expecting to close on a dozen properties this weekend alone. She's been telling everyone they'll be able to celebrate by taking a sunset drive down your private trail. The trap was set. The bait was her own arrogance. I called Big Mike. We start Friday at dawn, I said. Friday morning the air was cool and still. The first hint of sunrise was painting the eastern sky pink. And then came the noise. The deep, guttural roar of a diesel engine. Then another and another. A convoy of heavy machinery rumbled down the county road and turned onto my property, staying on my side of the old cut chain. A backhoe, a bulldozer, and 3 massive concrete trucks, their mixing drums churning in the dim light. Big Mike was there, orchestrating the whole thing like a battlefield commander. By 6 a.m., the ground was shaking as the backhoe dug a deep trench along the 150-foot stretch we'd marked out. By 8 a.m., a web of thick steel rebar had been laid in the trench, and the wooden forms for the 12-foot wall were going up. The sounds of construction, shouting men, whining saws, the clang of hammers on steel, echoed across the pasture. It was around 9:30 a.m. when she finally showed up. The summer showcase was probably just getting underway. She must have heard the commotion. Her white BMW skidded to a halt on the other side of the property line, and she got out, dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, ready for her big day. Her face, when she saw the scale of the operation, was a spectacular collage of confusion, outrage, and dawning horror. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "What are you doing?" I was standing by my truck, drinking coffee. I just smiled and gave her a little 2-finger wave from the brim of my hat. Big Mike lumbered over. "Ma'am, we're on private property, conducting a permitted agricultural construction project," he boomed, his voice easily carrying over the noise. "I'd advise you to stay on your side of the line." "You can't do this. I'll have you shut down. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the police," she screamed, fumbling for her phone. "Call 'em," Mike said with a shrug, and walked away. She did. A half hour later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. Cynthia ran to them, pointing and gesticulating wildly at the construction site. One of the deputies, a man I knew named Roberts, walked over to me. "Morning, Hank," he said, looking at the massive forms. "She's claiming you're illegally building on a public easement." I handed him the folder I'd prepared. Inside was a copy of my deed, a copy of the 1947 survey map, and the freshly signed permit for the agricultural security barrier. He took his time, reading each document carefully. He walked back to his car to show his partner. After a few minutes, he came back and handed me the folder. "Your paperwork is all in order, Hank," he said. He then walked over to Cynthia Halloway. We couldn't hear what he was saying, but we could see her reaction. Her face went from red to purple. She started waving her arms, yelling at the deputy. He just stood there, shook his head, and then got back in his patrol car. As they drove away, he gave me a slight nod. The look of impotent fury on Cynthia's face was worth the first $10,000 of the project right there. She stood there, her white pantsuit now looking foolishly out of place amidst the dust and diesel fumes, and just watched as the first concrete truck backed up to the forms. The chute opened, and a thick gray river of concrete began to pour into the foundation of my wall. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. All day Friday, the trucks came and went. By sunset, the entire wall was poured. All day Saturday, as her doomed open house was in full swing, my monument stood there, encased in wooden forms, curing in the Texas sun. I could see the prospective buyers, lured by the promise of a string quartet and rustic charm, pointing at the massive structure at the edge of the property. I could imagine their questions. I could imagine Cynthia's frantic, nonsensical answers. The final act of her desperation came on Sunday afternoon. The open house was a bust. The caterers were packing up. The realtors were leaving, shaking their heads. Cynthia had been stewing for 2 days, watching my fortress rise. The forms had been removed that morning, revealing the stark, gray, intimidating expanse of solid concrete. The custom steel gate had been installed and welded into place. The project was complete. I was sitting on my porch, watching it all unfold through a pair of binoculars. I saw her get into her BMW. But instead of driving away, she turned the car to face my new gate. She just sat there for a moment. Then I saw the reverse lights come on. She backed up about 100 feet. I knew with a sudden, giddy certainty what was about to happen. "Sarah, come look at this," I called into the house. Sarah came out just as the BMW's engine roared. Cynthia floored it. The white SUV shot forward. A missile of misguided rage aimed directly at the center of my brand new solid steel gate. The sound was incredible. Not the crash I was expecting, but a deep, resonant, and utterly final thump. Like a fly hitting a brick wall. The front end of the BMW crumpled like an accordion. The hood buckled, the windshield shattered, and steam billowed from the destroyed radiator. The gate, my beautiful, over-engineered gate, didn't even budge. It had a new scratch on it, maybe two. Her car was totaled, a heap of wrecked German engineering bleeding fluids onto the dirt. The driver's side door creaked open and she stumbled out, dazed. She looked at her ruined car, then at the unblemished wall, and she let out a scream of pure, primal frustration that echoed across the pasture. I lowered my binoculars and took a long, slow sip of my iced tea. My $52,000 wall had just paid its first dividend. And the best part? My security cameras, the new ones I'd had Big Mike install along the top of the wall, had captured the whole thing in glorious high definition. Her self-destruction was now complete, and I had the videotape to prove it. The aftermath of Cynthia's kamikaze attack on my gate was swift and deeply satisfying. The wreck of her BMW sat there for 2 days, a monument to her failure before a tow truck finally dragged the carcass away. The incident, combined with the sudden appearance of a 12-foot concrete wall where a scenic trail was supposed to be, had torpedoed her open house weekend. The prospective buyers, who had been sold a bill of goods, were now angry and asking pointed questions. The trap had been sprung. Now it was time to close it. The opportunity came, ironically, from her. In a last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation and pressure the county, she had demanded a public town hall meeting to discuss the ongoing development dispute. She probably imagined another public forum where she could play the victim, rail against the stubborn redneck, and rally the community to her cause. She even invited the same local news crew that had produced her smear piece, hoping for a triumphant sequel. She had no idea she was arranging her own public execution. My lawyer, Ben Carter, and I prepared meticulously. We didn't just bring our evidence, we prepared a full presentation. We had large, poster-sized blow-ups of the 1947 survey map and the key page of my deed. We had a projector and a laptop queued up with the greatest hits from my security cameras. Cynthia's crony taking an angle grinder to my chain, Cynthia herself driving through my terrified, pregnant cattle, and the grand finale, her white BMW obliterating itself against my immovable gate. And of course, we had a stack of 100 glossy copies of her own real estate brochure, the one promising exclusive access to my land. The town hall was packed. The room buzzed with tension. On one side sat the new residents of Lakeside Estates, looking confused and angry. On the other side were my friends and neighbors, old ranching families who understood what this fight was really about. In the back, the news camera was set up, its red light glowing. Cynthia stood at the podium, looking polished and confident, but I could see a tick in her jaw. She was running on fumes and fury. She spoke first, launching into a passionate, tearful monologue about community, progress, and the American dream. She painted me as an obstacle, a relic of the past standing in the way of happy families and their right to enjoy the nature they'd moved here for. "All we are asking for is simple access," she pleaded, her voice thick with fake emotion. "Access that was promised to us. Access that this man is cruelly and selfishly denying." When she finished, there was a smattering of applause from her side of the room. The town supervisor, a man who just wanted all of this to go away, then called my name. "Mr. McCoy, you have the floor." I didn't go to the podium. I walked to the front of the room and stood next to an easel where Ben had placed the poster-sized survey map. I wasn't a public speaker, but I wasn't nervous. I was just tired of it all and ready for it to be over. Folks, I began, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. I'm not much for speeches. I prefer to deal in facts. I tapped the big map. This is the official survey of my family's land, filed with this county in 1947. As you can see, the road in question is marked clearly as a private drive. Not an easement, not a public right-of-way, private. I then held up the certified copy of the deed. This is the deed which guarantees my family exclusive use of our property. This has never been changed, never been challenged until 2 months ago. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw some of the Lakeside Estates residents whispering to each other, looking at Cynthia. Her smile was starting to look brittle. Now, Ms. Holloway claims she was promised access. I continued, my voice getting a little harder. I'd like to know who promised it to her. It wasn't me. It wasn't my father. It wasn't my grandfather. No McCoy has ever granted access to that road to anyone. So who made that promise? I paused and looked directly at her. Then I turned to Ben, who handed me the stack of her sales brochures. I walked over to the Lakeside Estates residence. I think I know who, I said, as I started handing out the brochures. Ms. Holloway herself made that promise. I watched their faces as they looked at the brochures in their hands. I saw dawning comprehension turn to outrage. They saw the picture of my land, my creek. They read the words promising them an amenity that was never hers to give. They started talking at once, turning to the woman who had sold them their homes. Is this true? One man shouted at Cynthia. Did you sell us something you didn't own? Cynthia's face went pale. She stammered, It was a misunderstanding with the developer. The plat maps were confusing. There was no misunderstanding, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. There was only deception. And it wasn't just deception. It was harassment. I nodded to Ben, who hit a button on the laptop. The projector flared to life on the screen behind me. The room went silent as the first video played. Grainy, nighttime footage of sparks flying as my chain was cut with a grinder. Then, the most damning clip of all, the daytime footage of her BMW honking and plowing through my herd. Gasps filled the room. My rancher neighbors were on their feet, their faces dark with anger. Even the city folks looked horrified. I narrated the scene. That's my prize heifer she's about to run down, an animal worth $15,000. She suffered a broken leg and lost her calf because Ms. Holloway was in a hurry. The final video played without any narration needed. The silent, brutal footage of her BMW accelerating and smashing into the gate. The sound of the impact, captured by the microphone, echoed in the stunned silence of the room. People were just staring, their mouths open. I let the image of the wrecked car linger on the screen. This isn't about a road, folks, I said, my voice low and heavy. This is about a woman who believes that rules, laws, and common decency don't apply to her. This is about a real estate agent who committed fraud, knowingly selling access to property she did not own, putting the legality of every one of your home purchases into question. Chaos erupted. The homeowners were shouting at Cynthia, waving the brochures in her face. The news camera was panning wildly, capturing her terrified, cornered expression. And that's when the back doors of the town hall opened. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies and a plainclothes detective from the county's financial crimes unit walked in. Ben had made the call that afternoon, laying out the whole case for them, the fraud, the criminal trespassing, the destruction of property. They had been waiting outside for the right moment. The detective walked straight up to the podium where Cynthia was standing, frozen like a deer in the headlights. The room fell silent again, a new, more serious kind of hush. Cynthia Holloway, the detective said, his voice calm and official. You're under arrest for felony fraud, criminal mischief, and aggravated criminal trespassing. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The camera's flash popped, illuminating her face, a mask of utter disbelief and ruin. The news camera zoomed in, capturing every humiliating second for the 6 o'clock news. The real 6 o'clock news this time. The residents she had duped just stared, some with grim satisfaction, others looking sickened. And I just stood there, leaning against the easel with my great-grandfather's map on it, and I let myself smile. It was over. The downfall was total and absolute. Cynthia Holloway was buried in an avalanche of legal and financial ruin. Faced with irrefutable evidence, she was convicted on multiple charges and ended up with a sentence that included jail time and crippling restitution payments to me for the vet bills and the loss of Daisy's calf. But that was just the beginning. The homeowners of Lakeside Estates, realizing their contracts were likely voidable due to the fraudulent inducement, filed a massive class action lawsuit against her and the development company. She declared bankruptcy, but it couldn't protect her from the fraud claims. She lost her real estate license, her reputation, and every last cent she had. The last I heard, she was working a checkout counter in a town 200 miles away. The developer, to avoid their own wave of lawsuits, was forced to build a new, proper access road on the other side of the subdivision, a project that cost them nearly $1 million and delayed their final sales by over a year. The beige houses were finally occupied, but the residents learned a valuable lesson. They used their new road, and they kept to their side of the fence. I never had a problem with any of them again. My life returned to its quiet rhythm. The ranch was peaceful. The only sound on my gravel road was the rumble of my old Ford. Daisy's leg healed, though with a permanent limp. She couldn't be bred again, but she lived out her days as the most spoiled pasture ornament in Texas, a constant reminder of what was at stake. The wall still stands, of course. It's a stark, gray line against the green pasture. Some might see it as ugly, a scar on the landscape. But to me, it's beautiful. It's a monument to property rights, to perseverance. It's a testament to the fact that you can't bully a man on his own land. Every morning, when I drive out to check on my herd, I pass by it, and the sun glints off the smooth, hard concrete. It's the best $52,000 I ever spent. They say good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. If you enjoyed this Pro Revenge, hit like and subscribe. Share this with anyone dealing with an HOA tyrant.